Post-pandemic, what were the biggest challenges that maybe made Michigan Avenue's recovery tougher than some other markets and streets?
I think this is across high streets. I think what happened to high streets, especially high streets where it was high tourism, like a Mag Mile, where tourism was really important, that 10-year period before COVID hit, I think that the definition of flagship changed. And it changed from, this is our flagship, this is very special product, to this is our flagship, which means the space is just enormous.
How did you first get into retail real estate, and what drew you to specialize in the downtown Chicago?
Yes, so I have a bit of a different background. I moved to Chicago on a whim with a buddy of mine from undergrad. I went to grad school for modern European history.
Yeah.
I'm serious. My concentration was in 1920s Berlin cultural history, which is this amazing time of history of just like characters and these stories. And it's the Roaring 20s. And everyone in the States talks about the Roaring 20s, but the Roaring 20s in Berlin was over the top. So I went to grad school, and then I went to Germany for a year to become fluent. And in the process of becoming fluent and being there, I realized that I liked it, but I did not love it. And so I decided not to get a PhD. So I moved back to Chicago and trying to figure out what to do with my life. And I was introduced to real estate in general from a couple of friends of mine. And retail was what was most interesting to me because it was very visible, and in making a decision of what real estate am I going to get into, office, industrial, or retail, it just seemed like the retailers and the retail business was much more interesting. And that has held true because even today, with the sophistication that retailers have and developers and all of those things, almost to a person, they're characters. And I just enjoy that about the business, where I would not get those characters in office, residential, or industrial. So that's how I chose retail. In downtown Chicago, I like the urban environments. I had lived in Chicago for about 10 years before getting into real estate, and always really loved the CBD. I just think it's such an intriguing trade area, and that's why I stayed urban.
So you've been active on both the brand side and the landlord asset side of work. How do those dual perspectives affect how you advise clients today?
I think it is good to be on both sides of the business, because I think it just fosters an understanding of what the other side needs. And I think that's important in trying to get transactions done, whether they be small or large. I think that without being on the tenant side or the brand side, that when I am doing my landlord work, I would not understand the tenant's perspective and all of the information that tenants require to make a decision of is this site viable for us? Is it the correct thing to do? And everything that tenants have to hurdle to make it work. And if I was not on the landlord side and I was just doing tenant rep, I don't think I'd really get that, rec is a big thing for tenants. It's a very important thing. Landlord, they have rec too in their own way, and they have to hurdle certain criteria, and they're looking for certain things in their deals that make it worth their while to do or will push forward, and that sometimes they're okay with the vacancy because something else happened in the building. There's like, I don't need this deal right now. And so just having an understanding of how both sides look at it, I think it gives me a balanced nuance, and I think it makes me better.
So let's talk about Michigan Avenue and the Magnificent Mile, which you've been quoted about, quite a bit, and definitely very active. So post-pandemic, what were the biggest challenges that maybe made Michigan Avenue's recovery tougher than some other markets and street.
I think this is across high streets. I think what happened to high streets, especially high streets where there was high tourism, like a Mag Mile, where tourism was really important, that 10-year period before COVID hit, I think that the definition of flagship changed. And it changed from, this is our flagship, this is very special product, to this is our flagship, which means the space is just enormous. And with technology, retailers no longer needed to be so large because they had inventory control and they had just a much more efficient footprints. But the real estate market on the Mag Mile had already shifted to, we have these large 60,000 square foot spaces over four floors. And when that changed with technology making more efficient and getting back to a flagship means special merchandise, you can only get it at the store, that those landlords and therefore the street were stuck with essentially unleasable space, at least during this time of, I can't do anything with the third and fourth floor. And then that made it very difficult for the landlords to cut deals, which I think just made the recovery longer. And then finding retailers, not retailers that would take the third and the fourth floor, but retailers that would work with the landlord saying, look, I just need this rent to hold on to the building. Can you do this rent? And that's good to go. And I think that learning, because I think there was a pretty significant learning curve, extended the downturn, which I think made it different from the other downturns we've taken.
So do you think that's why vacancy rates are improving? Is that, really it's the landlords who started to kind of think a little bit differently on economics?
Yep. I think that was the first step. I think it was landlords saying, okay, we have to pivot. We just can't drive it as they were driving it, and as they should be, because demand was so high. And then I think now what has happened is there is enough new open stores, pedestrian traffic is definitely returned. The street looks better because stores have opened, and even the ones that haven't opened yet, they have the coming soon signs or the scaffolding's up when it's clearly, wow, new store is coming. And so now Mag Mile has momentum behind it, but it took, 2 or 3 years of solid work and leasing to get momentum on the street side.
So what kind of brands or uses are getting traction on the Mag Mile in your opinion now?
Yeah, there's definitely these experimental brands that I think retail people sometimes like, oh, it's an experimental brand and a little bit of a cut to it. But I think it works. Whether you respect or don't respect a museum of ice cream, the tourists like it. It's a fun experience to do for an hour or two. The Harry Potter store, which is a merchandise but experimental too, that's doing well. And in River North, which is important to Mag Mile because it feeds it, there's experimental brands going on the third and the fourth floor or going on side streets, and that just feeds the action, which is important. You're getting mainstream brands like a Uniqlo that is coming back, and then also like a Uniqlo, you are getting these foreign-based brands that have been on the avenue before and are returning, which is great. So Uniqlo is a great example. Mango is a great example. And you also have H&M, which never left the avenue, but they drastically downsized. They took half the space, but they stayed and just relocated to go smaller, albeit still a larger store, like a 30,000 square foot store. So I think it's those type of brands that are looking at these high streets that have high pedestrian traffic and high pedestrian traffic from outside of the city that they're in.
So talk to me a little bit about, the projects that are on the avenue, because you have, you had North Bridge, 900 North Michigan, what's Brookfield's old one, Water tower
Yeah, and
places.
water tower.
Those used to be, I think 900 used to be at the bottom of the rung, and then you had, water tower was
Yes.
always at the top. Northbridge kind of, fell off somewhere in the middle. But now, I mean, I think 900 is actually, doing pretty well. Water tower, I'm not sure what's going on there, and Northbridge, what's going on with the projects at each end of the street?
Yeah, and it's interesting where 900 kind of has flipped the switch, and I think that is a landlord who has deep pockets and is not necessarily dependent on outside money, so to speak. And they did a very nice job with doing fundamental things, but doing them well. And a lot of credit goes to Tisha for getting that vision agreed upon by the landlord and Kitsy Ritter to execute. They took a great local to go Brennan Sonic up to do the food hall up top, and I think on the challenging upper level floors, they worked deals to make sure that the lights are on. And then they really started getting typical rent deals on the floors where they could, and just kept the energy in the mall. And I think that's very important. Water Tower Place is a much larger lift. It was much larger. It's 8 floors. They lost their anchor where 900 didn't, with Bloomingdale staying. And I think there's more work to be done in Water Tower Place. And there's a physical, so says the papers in the street, that there's a physical renovation, or more than a renovation, going on in Water Tower Place, and that is being done in a very methodical way, and so it's well positioned. And I think people in Chicago do think Water Tower Place will come back. It's just a matter of, okay, will it? Northbridge, I think, is in a solid position, mainly because Nordstrom continues to do well. They do have the former Forever 21 space that remains vacant, but I think there's, with the Avenue having momentum, that flagship being very large space could get filled. And then they do have the small shop space fronting Mag Mile, which is very important. And then I think once they can figure that out, then they can get back into really almost traditional mall leasing. Look, it's interior space on the first, second, or third floor, but the mall's good and the avenue's back. And so there could be some momentum there. So I do think that both Water Tower Place and Northbridge will have a comeback. Just we'll take some more
John,
time.
are you working on a current project? I mean, do you have a landlord assignment that you want to talk about? Because
the landlord assignment that we have, which is really classic, it's classic CBD leasing, and it's never been considered sexy retail leasing. I think the project at One East Wacker is a very interesting one, in that it's retail at the base of an office building. The office building is fairly well leased. But the landlord it certainly needs more office leasing. It's really this work of the retail in an office building serves the office broker. And it's office broker, what do you need for in terms of amenities so that you can get office tours? And it's a little bit of a standard answer of, you get me great coffee, get me a sit-down restaurant, and if you can get me a fast casual that my tenants can go to 3 times a week, that is what the office tenant reps want. And depending on how you know Stone Real Estate, you either know us in various different ways of how you deal with us. And I don't think many people, at least specifically for me, know that that's what I've done as a matter of course all throughout my career. And One East Wacker is interesting in that because it's positioned on the East Loop, so there is a tourist component, a hotel component, and a residential component. We do actually have action from sit-down restaurants, a really good coffee user, and that has been an intriguing project because certainly the CBD, Chicago's Loop, is affected by work from home, but coming out of it, and just to hear how those F&B operators are handling what's going on for their industry, because their industry's got a little rocked. Inflation in food costs, what's going on with labor costs, especially what's going on with labor in today's environment, right, in the last 3 months. And it's not chaotic, but there's so much going on. It makes it very interesting, makes it harder, but it also makes it very interesting because it's by no means mainstream. But very interesting because we actually have action. So then you can kind of go through. So that's a good one.
What are some of the brands you're working with that you're excited about that you may not have shared with me previously?
Yeah, Huckberry just opened up on Armitage Avenue. I think it's their second physical store, and so that is a very intriguing one that we're working on. I need to look in terms of what is. There are some others that are not well known. The most kind of intriguing to me, and it is very interesting because I was not in real estate when people say the Gap was the Gap, but in the 90s, early 2000s, that was before my time. But with Gap Inc. having this resurgence, and there's so much interesting about it. I think from reading the media of what the leadership of Gap Inc. has done to get that brand going, and leadership matters, and these charismatic executives who can kind of move the people, if you will, and it's working. And sales are improving, and so being involved in Gap Inc. in the current day, and then going back to the 90s, and then in the early 2000s, because David Stone of Stone Real Estate, it got his career kind of launched when he was working with Gap. That is a very intriguing and exciting assignment because you don't have to explain the Gap. You may need to explain the Gap to younger people who weren't around in the 90s, but it is so iconic. And then to see them fight through the downturn they had and now come back in the sales to prove it.
Yeah.
It's cool.
What's a couple more questions? What's one trend in retail real estate that you believe is being overhyped?
I think the trend that is being overhyped, and I don't mean to be cute here, are the trends. I think people hear or see of a trend and they take it as a matter of course from here on out. The Mag Mile is an amazing street, and it was really beat up 4 or 5 years ago, and everyone was just so pumping up the Gold Coast. And the Gold Coast, Oak, Rush, and Walton, it's having its moment, and it is amazing. It's never looked better, but people forget or were not around that Oak Street, Gold Coast, but really especially Oak Street when the recession hit. Chicago almost lost that street because of we're on Oak Street. Lenders came a calling. They didn't have money to do it. And the benefit of almost losing Oak Street was that allowed Rush Street to complete its transformation from a nightlife street to actually no, retail can go there. And so these trends, I am old enough to remember when Google Earth and came about and brokers saying, oh my gosh, you never have to go to the property again. You can just go to Google Earth, and Google Earth and video has been great. It's very, very important. It's made it better. You still have to do showings, and you still have to go to the property and see it.
Regrettably, you still have to leave your office, or your house.
You're still out there. So I just think people need to take trends, take them seriously, work them to your advantage. But you move on. AI for renderings is amazing, and what you can do to an image. But that was happening before. Now it's just happening much quicker, and you can do it yourself. Paying a renderer to do it. So I think what is get overhyped, the trends that get overhyped are trends themselves.
You're a featured broker on Brand March. Why did you decide to join the platform, and how do you see it fitting into your strategy for visibility and deal flow?
Yeah, I do appreciate in a lot of things outside of work of just being with good people and people that force you to step it up, get better, hold serve. Okay, step it up, get better, hold and that process. And that's what I saw of the group of brokers that were in Brand March. I didn't know, and I still don't know a lot of them, but I know the names that people just talk about on a national basis, and I want to be part of that group, and I want to keep being part of that group and being my name mentioned in that group. So that's the best way I can do it, is to join those people, what they're doing, and keep the pace.